Good evening. I'm Jackie Krafchek, and I'll be walking us through tonight's July Equipped Live. I'm here with Greg Winter. Greg, good evening to you.
Good evening, everyone.
All right, so we still have quite a list of questions, and I've had a couple more submitted since the last Equipped Live that we held in June. So we're just going to continue on down this list. Are you ready?
Ready if you are.
All right. So our first question for today was submitted by Erin Lefebvre from ESI, and she says, how is it decided who will be involved in a new IBU or BGM from an investor standpoint?
If we use the term new IBU, that would lead me to believe that it's an early stage company and that there's some sort of a problem that it was being created for, and so it has a new vision and a new strategy. And if that's correct, then really the purpose of that business unit needs to be proposed for funding to an investor. And in the early stage investing world, there's a saying that you bet on the jockey, not on the horse, meaning that you're betting on the person leading that organization more than you are on the product or the technology. And that jockey, so to speak, or the leader of that business unit, really is accountable now to convert that vision into a reality using the strategy that was proposed during the funding. In an early stage company, though, a lot of things, there are a lot of unexpected activities, a lot of things that happen that you just didn't know would happen. And as a result of that, 8 out of 10 startups typically fail by, and failure by investors' definition is different than some other folks' definitions. In other words, failure to an investor is it's just not a good investment. It doesn't mean that the company actually goes bankrupt, but from an investor point of view, 8 out of 10 fail. And so because there's all these unexpected things, because there is such a high failure rate, the investor is really betting on that leader and on the jockey to build that team to develop that unit. So from an investor perspective, really what an investor typically is looking for is somebody that has the competency, but equally or maybe even more important is the passion to do whatever they need to do to convert that vision into a reality. And so they need to be doing experiments, they need to be agile, they need to be willing to work around the clock if that's what it takes to keep the promises that have been made relative to that investment. Now, I've been talking about the early stage. The other thing that we look at here in answering the question, how do we select someone? Again, that selection typically is made by whoever is proposing that plan for investment. Once that leader is selected, they need to now select their own team. But typically that leader, if it's an early stage company, is going to fit a persona that we, in the investing world, the early stage investing world, we call Steve the storyteller. And why is he Steve the storyteller? Well, because he's good at communicating the vision so that his team can understand, the customers understand, the vendors understand, the ecosystem understands what vision is being turned into a reality. After that gets to what we consider investment readiness level 9, then we go to Bob the builder, who now is essentially growing that business unit and growing the employment. Once that becomes more mature, then you want Don the defender leading it, where he's basically just defending the success that's been achieved. But all companies have life cycles just like people, and at some point they go into a death curve, and in the death curve you want Larry the Liquidator. So that's how we select those folks, but typically in the early stage we're looking for somebody with the competency and the passion that fits the persona of Steve the storyteller.
Did you come up with those names, or are those from example in literature or something somewhere?
That's something that others have come up with. I'm not
Okay.
clever enough to come up with that stuff myself.
No, you're more clever than that. You'd have come up with more creative names for them. So, okay, well, I think that makes sense. That's a great explanation without probably getting too far into the weeds. So our next question then is from Nick McDonald he's with ITS, but he also, when he submitted this, he wanted to make sure that we gave a big shout out to his awesome team members. So he said, if you're going to use my name, you have to give a shout out to the team members. So his question, as some businesses, they have deals with gyms for discounted membership. One business, for example, has an agreement with a local athletic club here in the Alpena area for a significantly reduced membership rate. For example, the employee pays $10 and the organization pays the remainder of that discounted rate. Is that something that the IFMC would ever consider moving forward?
Probably not at the IFMC level, because the IFMC is an economy, but at individual business unit levels, that may be a choice that gets made. Do you have any idea, Jackie, how many or approximately what percentage of IFMC team members are current subscribers or members of Bay Athletic?
I have no idea, but I don't think it's too high of a percentage.
Yeah, and that would be my assumption as well, that that's a pretty niche market, if you will. And so if that is correct, then I don't see that turning into the next health insurance or 401k program, which we do get very involved with at the IFMC level. But there's a whole host of reasons for that. But with the IFMC being more of an economy than it is a business, I think we can learn some lessons maybe from the history of the U.S. And if you look at the U.S. when it started, transactions were done by trading tobacco and beaver pelts and beads and various foreign currencies and some local coins. But it only took less than a couple decades before, at the federal level, it was decided, and I think it's called the U.S. Coin Act, or U.S. Coinage Act, I believe, that now formed the U.S. currency that we know today. And the problem that was solving was just the confusion and the difficulty with valuing all those different things, because a beaver pelt, all beaver pelts aren't the same, all beads aren't the same, and all tobacco isn't the same. So that created a lot of inefficiency in commerce. And so that was the way that the U.S. solved that problem. If we look at the IFMC economy, we have adopted the U.S. currency as our primary currency, although, like I already mentioned, I mean, we do dabble, more than dabble, with health insurance, 401ks. I've actually played with cryptocurrency. I've got my own pay in cryptocurrency, but even that, as developed as that is, that was still more pain than it was worth. And part of that is it doesn't fit nicely in the U.S. tax system. So, part of the issue when you're dealing with payroll is if you're compensating people in something other than U.S. dollars, it needs to be converted into U.S. dollars for tax purposes, or they need to know the value of it. And so those sorts of benefits, if you will, really create a lot of administrative costs that I don't think most people understand. And so I just can't see us doing that at the IFMC level unless it's pretty significant, like health insurance or 401k.
Yeah, that makes sense, especially when you look at studies of what makes employees happy and what leads to retention. So, you look at companies that might have break rooms and game rooms and on-site massage parlors and all these different things. Those aren't the things that employees say actually make them happy. It's more being valued, knowing that they're contributing and making a difference, and then being paid fairly. So those are the things that continuously come up on top of that list. These added things like a health membership aren't necessarily the things that lead to retention. So I'm not sure if that was where he was going with this question, but definitely research would support it's not necessarily something that would help with retention. So moving on to the next question. This was submitted by Rusty with Enduraveyor. And these are some lengthy questions this time. He says the IFMC has always promoted communication flow through chain of command. However, as communication tools advance and change, will the IFMC explore different methods of communicating that are perhaps more effective? And he threw a quote in here from Elon Musk, because Elon said communication must travel via the shortest path necessary. So the question is, do you agree or disagree with that statement? And do you believe that the shortest path is always chain of command?
I do agree with Elon Musk's statement with the real emphasis on necessary. And do I believe the shortest path is always chain of command? No. But maybe the way to demonstrate this, and I want to be careful not to be so extreme with this that it's offensive, but an example here might be to say, well, okay, so the shortest path might be for a salesperson to just instruct a customer's bank to send the funds right to their own account to save all the hassle of getting their paycheck. Well, that would get pretty complicated pretty quick. And so there need to be safeguards in place for that. And so the safeguards that are in place typically are that, because most business is simply, I say simply, but it's mainly making and keeping promises. And so the customer certainly wants to know and wants the vendor to know when they actually made a promise and when they were just talking about the concept or when they were just getting a quote. And so we've got certain safeguards built into the system. You have a quote, but nobody's going to get access to the customer's bank account until there's a purchase order from that customer. And inside of our own organization, no one is authorized to spend any money on that purchase order until there's a job number. And time cards are used to charge time to the job number. And we know the customer isn't going to pay until there's acceptance of that shipment. And so those are all safeguards in the process. And so those, I would view those as part of the necessary things that Elon Musk might have been referring to. If we look at maybe the examples in the first question that we addressed tonight, and we look at the IFMC level, so we've now got a Steve the Storyteller who's trying to convert this vision into a reality. He's made promises to investors, but yet we know there's going to be all sorts of unexpected events that cause him to have to pivot and change and change the direction that he's going. But it's got to be through that leader's team. And so that a lot of times in those early stage companies, there's a lot of most people would consider chaos because things are changing so rapidly. And so there's a real need for communication. If somebody in the organization just makes assumptions that certain things are going to be the way they always were, there's a pretty high probability that there's going to be some ugly surprises in there. And that's really one of the reasons 8 out of 10 businesses fail in early stages. So I think the necessary part of Elon's comment is really important, but I do agree the shortest path for the communication that's necessary is optimum.
So what advice from everything that you've learned and witnessed and observed all of that throughout your career, what advice would you give people when it comes to communicating with their teams? Is there some like base advice that you would give somebody that's not going to take us 20 minutes to talk about?
Boy, that's a tough question, Jackie. You know, I mean, there are many articles, many books written on that. And at the end of the day, it really does boil down to working with your team enough so that you start to just have a tacit understanding of what that other person means, and you're reading into not only their words but their body language, and you're just aware enough of what the job is that you're doing, what those personality traits are, that you develop an understanding. And I'm pretty sure almost everybody understands that. You know, there's some people that you almost know what they're going to say before they say it, and there's others that just doesn't happen. And that's all part of, and that really goes back to the very first question of that leader building that team. You know, you've got to build a team that you can communicate quickly, clearly with, and trust that they understand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that is a huge question. I realize I sort of put you on the spot with that, but I completely agree. Is communication is an ever evolving topic. So getting to know your team, talking about your communication, continually interacting with one another, all that is really important. So we are at a few minutes past our scheduled time, per usual. So I saw a message that bonuses were a message about bonuses this year, and I think that, am I understanding correctly that those are going to be paid in beaver pelts this year?
I didn't hear that one, but we could consider that.
All right, we'll have to figure out what those are worth and what a quality one versus not quality, all those factors. So, all right, so we did schedule the next Equipped Live for August 18th. So as usual, I will get an email out to everybody, but August 18th, you can expect and put that on your calendar if you wish. So Greg, any parting thoughts?
Let's take the shortest path necessary to adjournment.
Excellent, thank you. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.